This is a difficult subject for most people because most people have a investment in the idea that they have free will, right? You do, don't you? Sure. You don't like hearing the idea that you can't do anything. You know what I mean? That means that you are helplessly at the effect of everything, doesn't it? Yep. It means that you're helplessly at the effect of everything if you can't do anything, right? So the mind will immediately reject that. No, I'm not accepting that, right? Okay, don't accept it. The reality of it is that people who have written on the subject of determination, including quantum physicists, psychologists, philosophers, have all unanimously agreed there is no free will. And even though that's the case, and if you don't believe what I just said, take it up, Google it, study it, read some of the books that are out there about it. They present irrefutable arguments. An irrefutable argument can be made that there is no free will. The evidence says it absolutely clearly that there is no possibility of free will. And even though that's the case, right, it still rubs people wrong and people find themselves confused about it, resisting it, and so forth. And this is an important part of the teaching, by the way. You know, why? Because there can only be free will if there is a separate self. That's why it's an important part of the teaching, and the teaching is telling us there is no such thing as a separate self. There's no such thing. If it's true that there is no such thing as a separate self, right? Because you as a separate self is the one who would consider yourself to be a doer, you as a separate self. Once you're living in the self-concept, once you're living in the concept of a separate self, right? Free will seems to be obvious, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, but if you can do a thought experiment and you just remove the idea that you exist as a separate self, if there is no separate self, if you take that separate self out of it, right, then where's the free will? That's where the idea of free will comes from, is the idea that there's a separate self. But there ain't no such thing as a separate self. But almost all of humanity's most profound commitment is to the idea that there is a separate self. Right? We are all operating in our lives with one another as though we're separate from one another and we're separate from the rest of the world, aren't we? That's the game that we're all playing. We're playing the game of being a separate self. Right? It's an illusion. Now that illusion that you're having as being a separate self or being a self, right, is something that is part of the conditioning that exists in your mind and your brain. Okay? So for you to get out of it, for you to get free of the experience of being a separate self, for you to get free of the experience of having free will, you would have to continually practice experiencing the reality of your non-existence as a separate self. Constantly be committed to relaxing the body and calming the mind and paying attention in such a way where the possibility of seeing, having the insight into the truth becomes more probable, in which you actually experience being a separate self. That experience of insight that's called Satori or Kensho is an experience of non-existence. It's an experience that you're not there. That's what it is. It's an experience that you're not there. One of the teachers said the greatest experiences that you can possibly ever have in your life is the absence of your existence. And if you look at it, if you look at your life, right, If you really look and you really pay attention, you can see that the happiest times in your life, when you were the happiest you were ever in your life, right? What was happening was there, but you weren't. That's why you were so happy. Because you weren't there. So here's another way to look at it. If you have free will, now this is interesting when you consider this, right? If you have free will, I should be able to give you a book on human behavior, and you can read the book and it'll tell you how to behave in such a way that your life will work, right? There's books like this, right? Self-help books. It'll tell you how to behave, and if you behave that way, your life will work. You'll be happier, your relationships will work, you'll be physically healthier, the whole 9 yards, right? Yeah. Then how come everybody doesn't just read the books and that's the end of it? Yeah. What interferes? What interferes with if you have free will yourself to be happy. If you have free will yourself to only eat the foods that are the best foods for your body. If you have free will yourself to experience kindness, love, and generosity at all times. The literature tells us that these ways of behaving work, doesn't it? I mean, it's common sense, isn't it? You know, that if you're kind and generous and peaceful, and if you pay attention to what you're putting in your mouth, if you pay attention to how much exercise your body's getting, you can have a very fulfilled, healthy, successful life, right? Well, how come that's not happening? If you have free will, just will it. Just use your free will to be that way. You can't. You can't. You can't. And a lot of people say, oh, well, okay, if it's true that I don't have any free will, then I'll just stop. If it's true that there's no such thing as a real me that's doing anything, I'll just stop doing everything, if that's the case. Try it. Try it. The evidence, if you believe that you can do that and you attempt to do it, you'll discover you can't, and that'll be the answer to the question of free will. If you have the free will yourself to take a day and do nothing. Will yourself to do that and see if you can pull it off. Yeah? By the end of the day, the evidence will be clear that you don't have free will because you won't do that. You can't do it. You simply can't do it. So, if there is no free will, then what is there? If there is no free will, then what is there? There is a reality occurring here, and one of the things that we can say about this reality that's occurring here is that it's a cause and effect situation, is it not? Everything that happens because of what happened before it, isn't it? Look at it. That's how science works. That's how they study science, right? Yeah. Everything that happens causes what happens next. That's the way the universe works. Okay? And then we have this ignorant process that goes on in our minds in which we come to this conclusion of that's not true. That we come to this conclusion that we can interfere with the grand scheme. We can interfere with this operational process, right? That is way beyond any of our individual existences. We can interfere with that. That's naive. That's naive. In this thing that I shared earlier, right? One of the things that he said in this realized experience that he had was you can stop worrying now. See, this is the side of it that most people don't look at. If there's no free will, right, does it make sense for you to worry? No. What's there to worry about? What's going to happen is going to happen, you know? Yep. It's like, you know, when you start, and then if you start to look at how things are happening with the understanding that there's no free will, you get an education about reality because you're no longer misinterpreting it. Do you understand? You're no longer misinterpreting. If you start paying attention to what's happening with the understanding of no free will, you start seeing reality, start seeing how things actually occur. You know? So for me, sitting here talking to you tonight, as my good friend Paul Hederman says, this is my seat assignment. That's how he describes his teaching process. This is my seat assignment. He's been teaching for 30 years. Every single day he teaches. And he doesn't have any choice about it. He has nothing to say about it. I can think that I could think that I could choose not to be here, right? But I'm arguing with reality because I am here. The people who study this say, if you examine the evidence, what's the evidence say? Right? The evidence says, when you think you're doing something, when you think you're taking action, what's actually happening? Let's look at it. Let's study it, right? When you think you're taking action, what happens? A thought arises in your mind to do something, doesn't it? Yeah. Where do your thoughts come from?
What happened?
Yeah, what do we call that? Conditioning, right? Yeah. So your thoughts come from everything that ever happened to you that got stored in your brain, and that's the database you're using for your behavior, yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where's the free will there? The thought comes into your mind. You think you thought the thought, you see? You think you thought the thought. Now you think I have free will because I thought the thought and then I did the behavior, right? But if you pay close attention, thoughts are arising in your mind. You're not causing them to happen. You're at the effect of them, not at cause. You're on the effect side of it, right? If I ask you what you think, you follow me? Yeah. If I ask you what you think, okay? Yeah. You'll look and see what the thought in your mind says and then tell me. And you call that you thinking. There is no free will there. It just happens. Your thinking just happens. Right? There's only two possibilities, and this has been studied scientifically. The thoughts that occur in your mind are a precursor to your behavior, right? The thoughts that occur there, the emotions that occur, the mental activity that occurs in your mind is a precursor to your behavior. All that mental activity is a function of your conditioning. And the only other possibility besides your conditioning is your DNA, right? Yeah, it's in your chromosomes. You inherited it, right? In both cases, there's no free will. Is there any other alternative that I don't know about? So and if you want to study the evidence, you can go online, look. There's some recent good books on determinism. I forget the guy's name right now. I have the book. It's a thick book. I think the guy's a physicist, and he wrote a book on determinism, so people could have a very extensive volume of information that makes it absolutely clear in numerous ways of looking at it that there's no possibility of free will. So if you want to study it, study it. But you're going to find out that that's the bottom line. There's no such thing. And if there's no such thing, and what is possible by if there's no such thing and what is possible by applying that understanding to the way you function, if there's no such thing and you apply that understanding to the way you function, you're going to function differently. Because you're going to understand that there's no reason for you to be upset or worry about anything because you have nothing to say about it. It's kind of funny, really. It's kind of funny. You have nothing to say about it. You're here for the ride. You're not driving this. You're not, it's like when you were a little kid. My mother used to take me to a place in the park where they had kiddie rides, and they used to have the boats in the water, and you get in the boat when you're a little kid, and you're steering the boat, right? Steering the boat, pretending that you're steering the boat. Right? But you don't think you're pretending. You're steering the boat, right? But the boat is completely being steered. You're never steering the boat, right? And that's exactly the truth about our lives. Yeah. So if that's the case, right? Whatever you're attached to being a particular, see, this is where the interface of predetermination and the suffering comes in. This is where the interface of predetermination and suffering comes in. Okay? Everything is predetermined. It's going to happen the way it happens, no matter what you think and no matter how you feel about it. Okay? And everything you think should be different than the way it's happening, you will suffer. Isn't that true? Well, so predetermined says you don't have to suffer. You could just stop. You could just stop being attached to things being a particular way. That's a practice. That's a practice. You have to practice that because your brain has already been hypnotized to have expectations, doesn't it? You know, you wake up in the morning with expectations. You have expectations about yourself. You have expectations about other people. You have expectations about the weather. You have expectations about the president. Oh, shit. But we live our lives inside of expectations. And so as we go through our daily lives, right, we're looking at everything that's happening saying, that's not what I expected. I don't like that. Should be different. Oh, one of the things that my Zen teacher said last night that really struck me. Right?
You talk about fascism?
No. When he was talking about the fact that, and we don't see this. This is one of the things we don't see. You know, we think our mind's strong. We think our mind's powerful, don't we? Yeah. We think our mind's strong. We think our mind's powerful, right? How much does it take to disturb that mind? Not much. Almost nothing. Almost nothing. Almost nothing, you know. Any little things that happen, any little thing that happens in the mind goes, right? So we're training the mind to stop doing that. We're training the mind to stop doing that. The mind is a program, and it's a program that's designed for survival. So we don't want to erase the program or we'll die. It's keeping us alive, right? But we don't want to consider the program to be the truth either. It's a program for the survival of the physical body, okay? But because we don't know who we are and we take ourselves to be a concept or a person or a personality, the same program works to have the survival of the body and the survival of the personality. And if you're studying the teachings, one of the things that you're going to come across is the fact that the personality does not exist. So a large portion of the mental energy that goes on in your mind is designed, actually probably more of the mental activity that goes on in your mind is happening to ensure the survival of your personality than the survival of your body. More of the thoughts you're having are about you as a person than you as a body, aren't they? You take yourself to be a body, but the self-concept is larger than that, right? You take yourself to be a personality. So all of this energy is being spent in the thinking activity all day long, right? To perpetrate the existence of a non-existent self. All of this mental activity is going on all day long to ensure and perpetrate the existence of a non-existent self. Can you see that that's not a very workable situation? Spending so much time to protect something that's not real? That's what the 8 verses of training the mind are talking about. If you're protecting something that's not real, what is the point of doing that? What is the point of protecting something that's not real? No matter what the circumstances are, even if somebody who you've done great things for, out of the blue, does something to hurt you, that makes no sense, right? Most human beings in their ordinary state of mind would say, I am justified in anything I do to that person. They asked for it. Right? They're the one that caused me to suffer, so I have to deal with them. I have to annihilate them, psychologically at least. Annihilate them, right? Well, the 8 verses of training the mind tell us if you are clear that the personality doesn't actually exist, What are you protecting and what are you fighting about? But it's not an easy thing to practice. If you read the 8 verses of training the mind, you'll see your mind reacting to it just by reading it. Your mind's reacting to it like, oh, I don't know if I want to practice that. I'm not so sure I want to practice that. You know, people will walk all over me if I practice that. I have to fight for my independence. I have to fight for my right to not be harmed by other people. And the irony of it all is that nobody ever harmed you. Nobody ever harmed you. The harm you're experiencing is a mental state, not what somebody else is doing. Isn't it? The proof of that is obvious, right? Because, you know, somebody could call me all the names in the book. You know, when I worked in the prison system, I used to play around with this because most of the guys are black, right? So I used to call them niggers. And I said, oh, by the way, fellows, I was the warden, so they really, I didn't have to worry about them doing anything to me. If you did something to me, you were going to be in big trouble, right? So I used my position to call them niggers. Now, a lot of you, if you hear me say that, you say, oh, that's not right. It's not right. It's not right for you to call people a name that's not actually the reality of what they are. And so I didn't leave it at that. I would call them niggers and I'd say, oh, by the way, fellows, if that bothers you, you're a nigger. If it doesn't bother you, it doesn't mean anything. If it bothers you, how many nigger words do you have in your vocabulary? In other words, how many words could I use that when I called you that word, you would go nuts? Huh? Everybody's got that shit going on. Everybody's got niggerism. Everybody's being a nigger. Everybody's being a nigger in some form or other, you know what I mean? Your niggerism will come out when somebody calls you the name that will be the name that will have you want to jump on them, right? We all have that, yep. You know? If you're married, your partner knows what the nigger words are. Your partner will use the nigger words on you to get you to behave like a nigger so they can point it out to you. It's comical, really. It's comical. It's comical that anybody could have anything that they could say to you that would upset you. That's comical. It's just words. It's just words. You know? The way that the Buddha talked about this is he said, when people came to him to insult him, and people did, right? They would be amazed at the fact that he was unaffected by their insults. And at certain points, people would actually ask him, how could you not be affected by insults? How could you not be affected by that? And his answer was, if you brought me something to give me and I didn't take it, would it bother me? See, in order to be insulted, you have to accept the insult, don't you? That's stupid. That's stupid to accept the insult. Yeah? If you're awake and somebody insults you, right, you have compassion for them. If you're awake and somebody insults you, you feel sorry for them that they think that that's the way that they have to operate in the world. If you're awake. Yeah? If you're not awake, you will just automatically do what your mind tells you to do, which is to fight, to argue, to resist, to be in conflict, right? You know, when I talk about these things, it's not hard to understand what I'm pointing to. You know what I mean? It's not that obtruse. It's not that complicated, right? And yet, having heard what I just got done saying, you'll act stupid again. You'll act stupid again. You'll be involved with the people in your family or the public, and as soon as somebody says something that pushes the right button, you'll act like a jerk. So how powerful, see, it's interesting. So how powerful is just hearing it? It's not very powerful. That's another thing that the teacher said last night. He said, if you're just, and a lot of you are, by the way, if you're just hearing this like you're reading a book about something, it has no value. Not only does it not have value, but it'll have a negative effect, right? because you'll be reading about something that you can't experience. You'll be reading about something that you can't realize, right? So after having learned about it or read about it, now you have something to compare yourself with and have yourself be a failure. You know, we look at the situation that exists on the planet today, in the world today, especially in this country, right? And it's very disturbing, right? As if it never happened before. It happened a lot worse than this before. This is nothing compared to what happened before. Look at history. Look at some of the shit that went on, right? So, but we look at it with that limited perspective, right? So the bottom line is this: if you're here and you're hearing these teachings and you're doing these practices, right? And you don't understand that the application of these teachings in your life every single day without fail, the application of these teachings, that's what will make the difference. Not that you hear about the fact that you act ignorant and petty, and and this causes you undue suffering. It's not that you hear about that, but you're hearing about that as you apply what you heard in your life when the time comes for you to stop acting like a jerk. Then your life will be a different life. Then you'll be happier. You'll stop arguing with people. You'll stop attacking people. You'll stop being a listening for only hearing what you want to hear.